Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good following morning. This is AMA number 50, 50 weeks we've been at it. Unbelievable. 50 weeks, ladies and gentlemen, 50 weeks of COVID-19, but I think the end is in sight. It might be a little bit blurry, but it's coming in sight. So today is March 4th. We are very, very excited. Last week we had technical difficulties, but this week, great guest, world-renowned Holocaust scholar, Michael Berenbaum, who among a million other things he's done, was the driving force, was the program director, was the, I forget the exact title, but I will tell you, he was the project director, of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and is really a great guy, good friend. We're excited to have him. He's in the waiting room. We are all good, and we're going to talk to him in a few minutes. Boker Tov, Linda, Boker Or, Ryan Kaplan there, Sebastian tuning in from his vacation from the yurt. Hello, Sebastian. Hello, Kasha Leonardi, busy the table making Kasha Leonardi. Saul Schachter also sending me a message. Am I there? I am here, Saul. Do not worry. Do not worry. Good to see everybody. Oh, Sita, my dad's watching. Hi, Dad. I tried to call you, Dad. You didn't answer. Good morning, Randy from Palo Alto. Randy, the newly vaccinated Randy. Good to see you, Randy. So what's going on in the world? In Poland, they just announced a change, I think, in the timing for vaccinations. Now, starting now, if you get the Pfizer one, they're going to wait like 4 or 5 or 6 weeks or something, much longer, which is a bit of a change. But besides that, things are still open-ish. So we're seeing what's happening, if there's going to be a fourth wave or not. Good morning, Sue Ellen, Colorado. How are you, Sue Ellen? Good to see you. So that's in Poland, not too much going on, except they're, I think, extending. They realize that they'll be able to better serve the public here by vaccinating more people, but with only one vaccination, and then eventually the second vaccination. So that's kind of the news, but nothing too surprising. Big news, of course, Johnson & Johnson being approved in the world, which is great news for everybody, adding a third one in the US and a fourth one in the world. I don't think the US is doing the AstraZeneca, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be. So that's where we are with that. Interesting going on in Israel with the elections, because Israel is having a big fight about whether to let people in, not let them in, how many to let in. There's an idea that with special permission, Israel's closed. So with special permission, you can go to Israel, but now they're saying it's been politicized and they're only letting the Haredi in because they're going to vote for Netanyahu. So Bibi is organizing it so only the far right can, or only the Haredi can get in, because they'll vote for Bibi and then the sort of accompanying parties as part of his right-wing coalition. So not everything is politicized. We certainly saw that at CPAC this week. The return of Donald Trump. I don't want to get too much into his speech and all of those things. It's just that there's a really dangerous aspect of the leadership of the Republican Party right now, which knows that the election wasn't stolen. They understand that they're just humoring Trump, but people believe them, and it's a complete dereliction of their duty to be propagating these lies the way that they are. I think it's incredibly dangerous and will have a really profoundly negative long-term effect on American society. So I'm very, very worried about that. Hey, Marcel and Marilla, how are you guys doing? So happy you're here. Hi, Sandy from sunny New Jersey. Sandy, 4th of July. Good to see you. And Saul. So yeah, that was Trump, a little bit upsetting. I'm going to go fast, and I want to hurry up and get to Michael Berenbaum. We're going to finish a little bit early today because I have a very, very important Zoom call. Not that this isn't important, but actually the first time I have like a pitch for a grant that we're doing for a federation, and I have to do the sort of online presentation for them, and that's starting right at 11 o'clock New York time. So I'm going to finish a few minutes before, just so I can get my head ready for that. See what else is going on. In terms of things that I've done or watched, again, it's not usually having done so much, but I did help Kasha make a table. Actually, we had an old table, and Kasha had this idea of tiling it and putting in some like mosaic tiles, and she made a very, very beautiful table. So our new table, I think we saved a lot of money by using tiles that we had and getting a few little small kind of stone and metal mosaic tiles that we glued onto the table, we meaning Kasha. So that's something that was a fun project that we did. We watched Fame. It's interesting, my mom passed away a few months ago, and every so often I just sort of have these things in my head that, oh, my mom loved this TV show, or my mom liked this movie, and it kind of makes me a little bit nostalgic for these things that my mom, who is very much like me, that got very, very obsessed with things that my mom really appreciated. So one of the things that my mom loved was the movie and the TV show Fame. So Kasha had seen the TV show. It was on here in Poland, but had never seen the movie. So we watched the movie, which was great. I think it's just still stands up, the music, and just, a lot of the characters then went on and were in the TV show, which I also liked. The movie is much darker than the TV show, but I think both of them real classics. And especially as somebody, if you're from New York, then the movie looks like New York looked in the 70s. That's a pretty faithful reproduction of New York City, dirty New York in the 70s, with all the graffiti on the subway and, just rusted cars. And it has a real authentic look to it. So that's kind of what we've been up to. We're gonna make pizza this weekend. Kasha's family, her mom and sister and nieces are coming down with the dogs. And we are gonna, so I started making my dough. I'm gonna make pizza at some point this weekend. So next week I will give you a report on the pizza. And very exciting news, we Ride for the Living Global Challenge, of course, coming up this June. We'll see what happens with the in-person ride, but the Global Challenge is here. We have more than 1,000 people signed up. It's all going really, really well. And we have finalized the poster. So I will present to you, ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in the wild, and I hope you can see it, printed version. This is the Ride for the Living Global Challenge. Maybe if I hold it back, you can see that. That's our poster for this year, Ride for the Living Global Challenge, with our Global Challenge logo, which is the Ride for the Living logo inside on the globe, inside our new Global Challenge. That is our poster for this year. I hope you guys all like it. And of course, we'll participate. If you haven't signed up for Ride for the Living Global Challenge, please sign up, get your friends and family, anybody you know. Let's join all together in June, all in our own communities. Let's help support Holocaust survivors all over the world, wherever they're in need, in all different communities. So I'm happy you guys seem to like the poster. Rabbi Avi likes it. Kasha likes it. Agnieszka Gish says yay. Saul likes it. I'll take that as unanimous approval of the poster, and we can vote in. With no further ado, I am going to let in our guest today, my good friend, who has the longest bio of anybody I've ever had on the show. Michael Berenbaum is a scholar, professor, rabbi, writer, filmmaker. He's won awards and Emmys and every award you could ever think of. He's a director of the Ziggy Ziering Institute at the American Jewish University. He was the project director of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and he is a very, very close friend of mine, a collaborator on our soon-to-be published magnum opus op-ed about calling on the world for Holocaust Survivor Day. It's my great pleasure to welcome my incredibly good friend, Michael Berenbaum, who, besides everything else, and I'm sure he'll tell you, one of the great honors of my life, along with perhaps one of a minor honor in his life, was having a bracha at my wedding.
One of major honor.
Major honor. Thank you, sir.
We can't say in public who I made the blessing with, because it would embarrass generations of her family.
Well, I will leave whatever you leave unsaid. I will always defer to people wiser than I am, and you are in that category. So, Michael Berenbaum, really one of the preeminent scholars of the Holocaust, and doing so many different things with it. In other words, multimedia, doing films, creating museums and all this, and I want to touch on all of that. That I think that's fascinating for me. There are people who are just professors doing one thing. There are people who are writing about it, but you've done so many different things related to the Holocaust. And of course, Poland, the Holocaust is never far from our reality, especially here in Krakow. So in terms of your involvement, were you always, growing up, were you particularly obsessed with the Holocaust? Was this a natural thing? Did you always know that you wanted to focus on the Holocaust, or did you just did it just happen?
I'll tell you the story because it's an interesting story. I grew up in post-war New York, and I grew up and went to Yeshiva of Central Queens, which you know. But Yeshiva of Central Queens, when it was a place for Hebraeus. We learned Ivrit Bivrit, Hebrew within Hebrew, never spoke a word of English during the entire morning. We spoke perfect Ashkenazic. In fact, we spoke such perfect Ashkenazic when I went to Israel for the first time. My way of asking for directions was Shakespearean. If your heart inclineth in my direction, would you kindly indicate to me, thy humble servant, what is the proper path upon which one should tread to reach his anointed destination? As you can imagine, the Israelis laughed hysterically at me because, according to my teachers, they had ruined the Hebrew language in resurrecting it. My teachers were either survivors or refugees. But in that era, we didn't speak of that. We only heard certain words: camps, children, death. I also grew up in a town called Kew Gardens, which is adjacent to where you grew up. Kew Gardens, in those days, we went to an Orthodox shul, and Kew Gardens in those days was comprised of, at least the Orthodox synagogue, of German and Belgian Jews who had escaped in 1938, 39, and 40 because they had portable wealth. They had diamonds. They were all in the diamond industry. And my father was one of the very few Americans and one of the very few Yiddish speaking. The language of the public language was English. The language of the synagogue, really the familiar language was German. So they were trying to recreate New York what they left behind in Frankfurt or in Antwerp, maybe even in Brussels. And they were the wealthier group of what was Frankfurt on the Hudson. I was working on a question in the history of religion. Why did the Jews not go out of business? Why did they have to defeat? What is it about this tenacious people that rebuilt itself in the aftermath of defeat? Something that you should know a little bit about, given the nature and really the sacredness of your work. When somebody said to me, you're not asking an ancient question, you're asking a modern question. The modern question is, why did the Jews not go out of business in 45? Why did they double down on Jewish life? They gave me a book on the Holocaust, and I realized, apparently subliminally, I was asking that question. I started reading, I never stopped. And I've always found it of tremendous interest, but my interest really began, first of all, in the mystery of rebirth. And I use two very interesting examples. I once interviewed a guy, a man by the name of Rabbi Arnold Weider, of blessed memory. He was a mole in Boston, a ritual circumciser. And I asked him, where did you learn to be? And because he was the mole in Boston, he had a nickname which I appreciated, and you'll appreciate as well. He was called the Yankee Clipper. With no apologies to Joe DiMaggio, because you understand how the Boston Red Sox do not like the New York Yankees. They've never forgiven them for the career that Babe Ruth had in 1918 when they traded the Bambino.
Yeah, we don't like them either.
What?
We don't like them either.
You don't like them either. Okay. So I asked him, where did you learn to be a mole? And he told me he learned to be a mole in Bergen-Belsen from his father. I asked myself a question. I asked him a question, who did you circumcise? He said, we circumcised Jewish boys, we have to be gender specific here without leaving out girls, because girls don't get a circumcision, thank God. He said, I learned to be a mole from my father. We circumcised Jewish boys who were not circumcised during the war, and then all the Jewish boys who were born. And I said to myself, what is it about these people that for 6 years, if they lowered their trousers, they were dead? And 6 years in a day, they dare to circumcise their sons without knowing where they're going to live, without knowing what the world was going to be, without knowing that Nazism was not going to re-erupt. It had dominated all of Europe.
Right.
And that was part of the reemergence. I also had a friend who said that when her parents left Auschwitz, her father weighed 78 pounds and had lost his family. Her mother had weighed 65 pounds, had lost her husband and children. And she was born 19 months later into a living Jewish community, which had a politics, which had a press, which had job training, and which had the highest birth rate in Europe. The highest birth rate in all of Europe was in the DP camps, meaning that the Jews responded to death by recreating life. And they responded to death by recreating life, not in the way in which soldiers come back from the front and say, let's get married, let's have children, because they've seen so much death. They deliberately recreated Jewish life, and then they doubled down on Jewish life by bringing the Jews together in Palestine, which then became Israel. And it was sort of the great story of rebirth and rejuvenation, which then got me interested in the Holocaust. And then I had a piece of incredible luck, which is I thought I was a university professor. I was at a great university, Wesleyan University, thought I was going to stay there for my career. They had published my first book, and I was, finished my doctorate, a young academic, when all of a sudden I got a request for a series of bizarre reasons to staff the President's Commission on the Holocaust, well in ancient history under Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter was, since then, we've had Reagan, 2 Bushes, Clinton, Obama, Trump, and now Biden. So that's how long ago it was. And I left that after a year and a half. And then I got a request much later to come back to staff the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, because they had gone through 5 or 6 executive directors, all of whom knew museums but didn't know the Holocaust. And when you're on your 7th wife, you have to begin to believe that it's not all her fault.
What Mickey Rooney used to say.
Yeah. So what they and Larry King, what they said is, maybe we should hire somebody who knows the Holocaust who can learn museums. And that's how I got my break, which was to do the Holocaust Museum.
So I want to ask you about that, because that's a fascinating thing, and that's the next thing. But I want to back up for a second, because you touched on something very interesting for me, which is, I think that you came to the Holocaust from a completely different point of view than I think most people do. And I think many people, their original fascination with the Holocaust, or their original deep question about the Holocaust, is how can people do this? How is humanity capable of doing this? But it seems to me that, I'm sure that's obviously part of this and part of the thing that you've explored, in different ways. But your initial attraction, if you will, to this idea was less about what they did to us, but more, and why and how and all of this, and how is it possible and what led to it, but more about how are we able to continue after that? In other words, the idea that stayed with the Jewish people was something that was strong enough to last beyond the Holocaust and not be extinguished by the Holocaust. In other words, especially when so much of it is based on religion. And if anything, you would think, if anything would give you a negative impression of any sort of holy being looking out for you, it would have been what they had just been through.
Well, I later wrote on the question of where was God.
Yeah.
But if you look at the entirety of my career, you can say the following, and this is only in retrospect, not in prospect. Sometimes you only understand what happened in retrospect. I brought to the American people and helped bring to the American people and the world an event that could not be communicated to me in words. Holocaust Museum. I then went on to head for Spielberg, the Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, and I gave my teachers in that generation who did not speak the opportunity to speak. So in one sense, I made up for what wasn't told for me and what they couldn't say in the way in which I worked career-wise. And that became an incredible privilege, a really incredible privilege. So I came to it. I was first interested in what we might call, the Yiddish historian said, we shouldn't only be interested in how Jews were killed, but we should be interested in the question how Jews lived,
Of course.
including how they lived under circumstances of ghettoization, concentration camp, and all of that. And most of the field was interested in the question, how were Jews killed, which is perpetrator history. And I'm interested in perpetrator history, victim history, bystander history, upstander history. And I don't call the rescuers the righteous because I don't think many of us aspire to be righteous. We may aspire to be decent and to be mensches. And now I'm very interested, because of what we see in our world today, in the question of the enablers. In other words, there's more than a bystander, there's an enabler. I wrote a piece in 2016 before President Trump was elected, called "Ingratitude to Donald Trump." And what I said is, I gave a lecture at the beginning of my Holocaust course, in which I said that some people voted for Hitler because he was an anti-Semite. Some voted for him despite the fact that he was an anti-Semite. Conservatives felt that that the majesty of office would force him to the center, and that they could, as men of wisdom and experience, and they were all men in those days, as men of wisdom and experience, they could control him, and he wouldn't be able to control them. Now, when I first gave that, my students didn't believe any of those propositions. Along comes Donald Trump, and there are no comparisons to Hitler. And all of a sudden, I say that in class, I say one paragraph, and I save an entire lecture and a half, class and a half of explaining the documentation of that. So I'm enormously interested right now in the question of those who are complicit and those who are enabled and those who turned a blind eye to what was happening because they liked other things.
Yeah,
Germans will tell you that if Hitler had left office in 1938, before Kristallnacht, he would have gone down as a great chancellor.
Yeah, you don't always want, this idea of not using the Nazi analogy and all this when you talk about current things. And if you've used, you sort of have gone you've gone just to the end of the well, to the bottom of the well, if you have to go to the Nazi analogy. But not being a Holocaust scholar, but living amidst the, after effects of the Holocaust, and watching American politics lately, not only American, but I think led by America, or America being the most
one of the groups that's going in that direction,
and the most important. In other words, I watch what Hungary. It's not horrible what's happening in Hungary, but Hungary does not have the international importance of the United States and nuclear weapons and the rest of this. But I think that Donald Trump is what he is. Not to make everything about Trump, but he is what he is. There will always be people like that, and I think that you're supposed to have systems, and you're supposed to have people safeguarding those systems that are supposed to keep those people from being the ones in charge. And I don't blame Trump as much for being Trump. He's never tried to hide who he was. He always is what he is. But the McConnells and the rest in the world that know better, that think that they're gaining something by allowing him to do his thing, those to me, I think historically will go down as the real criminals here.
Yeah, we call it checks and balances, and not going off the rail. But
Yeah.
let me bring it full circle back to you, Jonathan, my really good friend, which is what fascinates me, is that you're dealing with a community that everybody had presumed was dead. Well, I was in Krakow for Tisha B'Av in 1979. And we went to the Ramu synagogue. And I'm describing something that's going to sound like it's trite or poetic, but it's absolutely literal. There was barely a minyan. One was blind and one was lame. One was without an arm and the other was without a leg. One was mad, and we were worried about the Jew who was sane. And that night, it's written in a book called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. A Jew gets up, and we had just come from Auschwitz, American Jew, and he tries to have a din Torah with God. And in the back of the synagogue, there's no back, it's a small synagogue. In one of the rows of the synagogue, a Jew says, "God doesn't live here anymore." And that's what he says in shul. So we thought that was the end. And in fact, that was I was involved in trying to take some of the books out of the temple, which is right next door to your JCC.
I see it out my window where I'm looking right
No,
now.
I know exactly where you are.
Right.
We were taking books out of the temple because the temple had ceased to function.
Right.
And the synagogue down the block from you was then a crutch factory. And we thought this was the end. And lo and behold, it's not the end. There's in one sense been a rebirth, however modest, but ultimately, the Jews may be whack-a-mole. You knock them down one place, they come up another. And there's a tenacity and an integrity, even if it's expressed in defiance, that I like about our people.
No question. We don't make things easy for ourselves, and it is fascinating, this idea, and I appreciate this focus less on the mechanism of, people can often get caught up. Everybody knows, I said something the other day which is interesting. I was talking to somebody and it was, everybody knows the number of 6 million, right? Everybody knows the number. How many people know how many survived? Maybe but nobody really knows that number, right? And it's a hard number maybe, but so is the 6 million. In other words, our focus is always on the negative, and with that scale, almost how can it not be? But if our choice is to go on, which it clearly is, right? Nobody's packing in. We don't have mass numbers of people, even after the war, who stopped, may have become more or less religious, but I don't think people to a huge degree gave up being Jewish.
Well, some did,
but not, yeah.
Some did. Let's be honest. I was
not like
not
en masse.
Not en masse, but you of all people should know how many people did, but we have no way of getting a hold of it, because you have lots of people walking in your doors every week.
Right.
When the doors were open and people could walk in, who say, "My grandmother just told me a secret that she was Jewish," right. And then the rabbi asks, "Is it your maternal grandmother? Is it your maternal grandmother or not?" And the rabbi says, "I have a terrible secret for you, which is that you are Jewish."
Right.
But the interesting thing is the bulk of the Jewish people decided to double down on Jewish existence, and they did something. They not only doubled down on Jewish existence, but afterwards, and this is what you and I have just been writing about, Afterwards, survivors, once they began to speak, transformed victimization into witness. And they transformed it into a plea for human dignity and human decency, for human rights, and for the innate value of all human existence. And they essentially, I see it in my work, they did ultimately, and they're doing ultimately what the biblical Jews did. What did our crazy biblical Jews did? They took a story of liberation, a particular story that happened to a particular people at a particular time, and they made it into, they without losing its particularity, they made it into a universal story of freedom. And therefore, everybody, we're about to have Passover. And if you want to have an interesting Passover, go around the table and ask everybody, what is your Egypt and who is your Pharaoh? Where is your Moses? What sea do you have to cross? What's your journey through the desert?
I'm writing all this down.
And what's your promised land? And if you ask that question, you don't have to go through the rituals of the Seder. You'll have told and retold in a new generation the story of freedom. Now, survivors who have seen the darkest chapter of human history have come out of that and said, we suffer, therefore we should put an end to that type of thing. They said never again, which is what they really mean now. And sadly, the world can't say never again with a straight face, but it can say never again with my consent, never again with my indifference, never again without my protest, never again without screaming to high heaven. But they've done that, and they've said we now have to respect all human life, all human dignity, and preserve and protect and enhance a sense of human rights. And that's why they became the moral conscience of our generation, not only the great survivors, but the ordinary survivors. And they had the integrity to be able to look back and to rescue from the smoldering embers at least a warning, at least a lesson, at least a plea, at least a cry. And that's their great moral contribution to our generation born after the Holocaust.
Is there a worry that we as a people can base too much of our identity on the Holocaust? Do you see that as something that you worry about, or that you witness at all in terms of Holocaust education?
I certainly worry about that, because I worry about the early stages of that. The early stages are, we fear that every sense of anti-Semitism is an impending Holocaust. We feel that we don't trust the world at all, and that's a legitimate point of view, and therefore we have no responsibility for the world. And we feel that because we were victims, we cannot be victimizers. And all of that is dangerous. In one sense, when we teach kids too early about the Holocaust, how do you raise a healthy child? I'm the father of four, and you have to, in the early stages of life, you have to tell your kid, you have to show and demonstrate in a loving way to your child, the world is safe and we're here to protect you. The Holocaust is the antithesis of that message. Parents had to give away children in order to protect them.
Right.
Parents couldn't protect children. So there's a danger that comes studying it too early, because you only should learn about the unsafety of the world after you've learned about the safety of the world. Otherwise, you can't feel any measure of security in it. And what I love about survivors is they understood the unsafety of the world, and Dafka, nevertheless, despite everything, the Afal Pikain, they brought new life into the world, and they had the capacity to love again and to create again and to defy again. So I firmly believe that the last word of Jewish life is not death, but rebirth.
No question. And I see it, it's been something frustrating for us here. Now, clearly we have our own interests. We're trying to rebuild a community, and people who come to Poland and don't see our community are not seeing it on multiple levels. By not seeing it, they're almost not acknowledging it, that it exists, which is, there's still, as much as we think we've done some of the work, the vast majority of Jews around the world don't know that there's Jewish life in Poland. And one of the things that we need for our community to be viable and eventually successful is for the Jewish world once again to accept that Poland is a place not only of Jewish tragedy, but of also a place of Jewish life. And it's been an uphill challenge for us to get people to see us. I've always talk about this one group. I once was next door in the Temple Synagogue, and I said, do you guys have a few minutes to come in to learn about what's happening with our community, rebirth, people finding out they're Jewish, survivors, all this good stuff going on. Can I talk to you about it for a few minutes? And they said, no, we're in a hurry. I go, well, where are you going? They go, well, we've been to Belzec, Majdanek, Treblinka, and Auschwitz, and we've got to go to Schindler. And I said, I think you got it already. An idea of that we're so afraid of it happening again, or we're so afraid of denial that we feel that we have to immerse ourselves and drown ourselves almost in all the minutia of the Holocaust. And sometimes there's a fear on my end that we don't leave enough space to take a step back and realize that the message of the Holocaust can only be just learning as much about it without seeing the larger extenuating circumstances and the life.
I'll tell you a story that happened to me in Krakow. I was in Krakow with my college roommate, and we've been friends for God knows how many years now. My college roommate is a very prominent psychiatrist. We sit, we probably sat even with you. We sit for the concert of the culmination. Anybody who's not been to Poland, if you're going to go to Krakow in the days when it was open and you could be healthy and the like, the final day of the Jewish festival is a concert in Kazimir of 25,000 people, fill the entire square. It's a great concert. And my college roommate turns to me and says, Michael, this is the greatest day of my Jewish life. And I said, Murray, what the hell's happening here? You and I were in the 6-Day War. We were there when Jerusalem was reunified. And he says, no, this is even greater. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if in the shadow of Auschwitz, Jews can celebrate, and Poles can also celebrate Jewish life, it was probably more fun being Jewish tonight in Poland than it was during the 800 or 900 years the Jews actually lived in massive numbers in Poland. If this is how we can respond in the shadow of the Holocaust, then there's something about this people that rebounds in an incredible way. And I've always taken that, and every year when I'm, except for last year and probably this year, every year when I'm at the concert, I hear the echo of his words all the way through. And I've been coming. I've been teaching at Yagaloni, and I always coincide my teaching with the festival. And I've been coming to the festival for years and years and years. And all of a sudden, I hear the echo of his words, and something marvelous is there, and it tells us a little bit about the secret of our people. And I'm worried. I have to tell you that on another level, I'm worried about it, because one of the things that I just read it. Let me talk as a.
Well, Michael, we're gonna have to finish a little early this time, just because I actually have to have a presentation for a federation that supports us. So we're gonna have to end now, and I don't want to cut you off once you start telling a story. So I would ask you two things. One, can we leave it here? And two, will you come back another time? Because I have a giant piece of paper full of lots of questions that I didn't get to yet, and I'd love to discuss them with you. If you promise to come back.
Jonathan, in all the years that we've known each other, there's only one word I've never uttered to you, which is a two-letter word, no. So the answer is obviously yes.
Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate it, and we're in touch. Actually, I'll separate note, because I have you here. I'll call you later about something.
Okay.
Thank you, my friend. Be well. Thank you. Bye, everybody.